Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Really excited to be here today. Paul, I'll just kick off. Paul and I are here. I'm Mike Gelman. I'm out of the Washington, D.C. area. Really excited to present here today. I've always worked with nonprofit organizations my entire career, mostly through public accounting. I'm now with Fiscal Strategies for Nonprofits. We're a consulting group that sits alongside the C-suite between CFO and the CSO, Chief Strategy Officer, on sustainability issues. And we also have sustainability education for nonprofits. We're an all-volunteer effort. We post information every week on fiscal, financial, legal, and governance issues. And I put in, you'll see the connection to the website here. I encourage you to check that out. I spend my time about a third doing consulting work, a third doing classes and such like this, and teaching. I head to University of Wisconsin next. My home base is out of Georgetown University here, and do a lot for classes for like ASAE and United Way and different groups like that. And then I'm proud to say my wife and I, we try to allocate a third of our time to be active volunteers. I think you get a lot more out of organizations than you learn, and it helps when we talk with boards that we let them know that we serve on boards. And so I think it's a great idea to do that. And Paul, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here today. My name is Paul Preziati, and I'm a partner with Johnson Lambert. A little bit about our firm. We're a national CPA firm that provides audit, tax, financial and advisory services, and other consulting services to nonprofit, employee benefit plan, and insurance companies. Myself, I co-lead our national nonprofit audit practice, geographically based in San Diego, though I'm coming to you live today from New Orleans, down here for a conference, and this is really one of the great American cities. Echo Mike's comments on serving on nonprofit boards, do it myself, been an enriching personal and professional experience all around. Well, let's get into it, Mike. This one, again, is a loaded topic. My perspective here is I think everyone can learn and improve. You and I both, we can still improve, and we'll bring you some of our lessons learned today.
Yeah, Paul, looking forward to this. And I think the message here is it's bigger than the numbers, even though we're constantly looking at numbers, and we have to remind ourselves and to be aware of our audience. And so we're going to take three key pieces. We're going to spend on 1, 2, and 3 mostly here about purpose-built messaging, a couple optimization tricks that Paul and I have used, and we go back and forth on this all the time. And then the reminder, Paul, right? We have to remind ourselves it's always bigger than the numbers. And Paul, I think the theme here today, I always like to say, is the numbers without the backstory are meaningless. And the backstory without the numbers are meaningless. And I think we're in a position as finance people to link those two. And yes, and then we got a couple of quick takeaways that'll help, as you'll see in 4, 5, and 6 here. So we're going to just jump right into here on purpose-built financial messaging. And Paul, state the obvious: our job isn't over when we generate the reports at the end of a month. Is it a lot of work? Yes, but it's just the very beginning of why we're here. Would you agree?
I agree, and especially for nonprofit organizations, when it comes to financial reporting, it's very easy to be Sally. When I say Sally, I mean same as last year. And it does take a little time, it does take a little effort, but building in that purpose-driven messaging can really go a long way in terms of getting engagement from a variety of different audiences, and that's what we'll talk about during this presentation.
The 2 words at the bottom, I always think you should keep in mind. If we can, what do people need? And then try to keep your eyes open to their wants. Needs are sort of universal, right, Paul? But the wants are going to be different to all these different audiences we're talking to. And so I think to bring the needs and wants into balance is we have to do the traditional role. And Paul, I've always learned so much from you, from your background and such, the oversight role, compliance, making sure that we hit the right benchmarks at the right time. It's important, the traditional roles, right? We have a fiduciary role.
We do have a fiduciary role, but we have to understand, again, especially in the nonprofit community, a lot of the leaders you're messaging to don't necessarily have a financial background. And you need to keep that in mind when you're communicating and disseminating reports.
And what Paul and I want to talk about is, and this might sound counterintuitive, that financial reports can actually inspire inspiration. They can fill an inspiration role or a call to action. And so it's this balancing act. Now, I've always been a forward-looking person, Paul, but I'm scared to death that we don't cover the oversight role correctly because you're a half a second away from something blowing up. So we want to be we want to inspire people, but we don't want to downplay that traditional role here. So Paul, can you walk us through real quick the traditional role of financial reports? And I think safeguarding assets is the number one, but how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, safeguarding assets and then also accomplishing whatever your financial goals are and giving board members and CEOs the tools they need to make the decisions they need to make sure the organization goes forward. And when we think about safeguarding assets, it's, making sure you have appropriate operating reserves, but then also too, making sure you're reporting financial reports on a timely basis, right? Because Mike, one of the biggest red flags whenever I go to work with an organization, whenever I get on an organization's board, is if they tell me, hey, we're in June, but we're just producing January's financial reports. I can't think of a bigger red flag in my mind.
And it's never perfect, Paul, but we have another balancing act is we got to get this information out timely, right? But it also has to be correct. So what's worse? Get something out really fast, but it's incorrect, or get something out slow because it took us a while to get it correct. So you're always in this push-pull there. And Paul, to your mind is, if it's information's late, we're leaving money on the table. We got to be able to act. So the timely word here is very important. One of my favorite questions to ask people when I get introduced to a new organization, and I want to see how they're operating, Paul, on a monthly basis, how are they taking this seriously? I love to ask the controller, the director of finance, that position, say, do you get your financial reports out timely? And if they get in my face and, of course we get them out timely, we're always here, I feel really good. Because a lot of things have to happen to be able to hit that. But if they start to go into we're down a person, this is our busiest time of the year, all these other excuses, you start to say is this really, a priority for them? So timely is a key one. But then are they using reports for oversight basis? And that's back on this traditional role that, the oversight here, and I think for non-financial people, Paul, do you agree with this statement? We got to explain to them, what does it mean to safeguard assets? We take it for granted, but I don't think they always understand that.
Yeah, you need to shape the message knowing what their background is and knowing what their knowledge is. And that could be different. That probably is different for every board. And, sidebar, that's one of the reasons I think, Mike, doing a board orientation, communicating and understanding your board members is so beneficial beyond all the tangible benefits of a relationship. It does allow you to craft more effective financial reporting, knowing them as a person.
And Paul, I think I learned more about this serving as a volunteer board member than being an accountant, all these finance person all these years. When you're a volunteer and you're looking at financial reports and you have to answer that middle word, performance, that's a little scary. We're not being paid, we're not volunteering. We're all of a sudden we're responsible for performance. And to me, performance it leads to that word on the bottom, fear. It ends at just a general hesitancy and a fear. And so what we want to do is take this traditional role that, I think you can start by looking, are we up or down on a line? Are we doing better or worse? Okay, and say, okay, it's okay to address that, address these negative feelings, and now to look forward. And this is the thing that Paul and I want to stress with you right now, is we want to use the financial reports as a role to looking forward, and that's the inspirational role. In the discussion, and Paul, I was literally on with an NGO last night, so we're meeting starting at 9 o'clock at night because of, we have people from all around the world, other people on in the morning. And I felt really good because we've developed dashboards that are spurring not just looking back, but looking forward, as we're going through the financial reports. And it really helped. In the report, we're at the point in time where we're getting ready to put in front of the board the final budget for next year. They're June 30 year end, and we're basically done all that. We've shared with the board a preliminary look. And I said to them, we're looking at April numbers, right, last night, Paul? And a projection, that's forward looking, for the remainder of the year, 2 months, and the next year's budget. And I said to them, as we go through these lines, we're going to actually look at them through the 27 view, even though we're talking about April numbers now. And it was really good discussion we had last night looking at it that way. We were looking at April numbers through the eyes of the 27 budget.
Well, I was not having a financial discussion at 9 p.m. last night. I'm glad you enjoyed that. That brings to mind that, right, you know what we can't change in those reports? We can't change the April 2026 numbers unless you identify an error. But to your point, what you can change are the future numbers based on forward-looking analysis. And that's why crafting those projections, those benchmarks that spur the conversation there, it's critical.
Yeah, and the wants are, of course, for them, a stronger organization, but they were a back-end loaded funded revenue-based organization, like a lot are. Their last 2 months, most of their funding comes in. So as of April, they're showing a seven-figure loss. And the projection was showing pretty close to break even. So over a 2 months period of time, we see a lot that was changing. And then, of course, the big part of the meeting at the finance committee last night was to approve the budget for board presentation. So, we started to say, how they're shifting. So I think these wants and needs and managing these are over. And that was an explanation of how one cannot exist without the other. We're looking at the traditional April report, but we're really talking about our aspirations for 27 and the purpose. And Paul, this is an example. I think, if you could flip that, I call it the 70-30 rule, that most finance committees are looking back through reports, performance reporting, 70% looking back, and if we're lucky, 30% looking forward. And we're going to have a section here in a few minutes on projections and, the culture of projections. But we want to try to spend more of our time looking forward and less of our time looking back. And I think that will help with the needs and wants and, for a brighter future. I mean, it sounds sort of corny, right, Paul? But we're always looking for the future to be better than we have been.
Yeah, one quick way to do that is to send out a consent agenda before your meeting that gives some background on what the numbers are. So that way everyone comes prepared and can discuss what the path is forward. That's, as I said before, that's a better use of everyone's time.
Exactly. So there is this, I don't know how better to say it, Paul, a necessary obligation to look over these reports. But if we can let people know that by them looking over the report to oversight these assets, it's actually a value-added proposition. They're going to help the organization to move forward. And I think the positive feelings comes the board feels more effective. They're making a difference. And in the reports, receiving the reports, and they're going to be more encouraged to open them. So, Paul, this is our first polling question.
All right, first polling question. Does your board open financial reports? And by open, we mean share financial reports
Yeah.
in advance of your meetings. And even more so, you can answer in the chat, does anybody read it?
Yeah,
Uh,
Paul, I was
we,
just thinking
we,
maybe we should change that open to
yeah,
read.
we'll change that for next time. But I think I'm more interested in the second question. Do you think anybody's reading it beforehand?
So my favorite
Yeah.
question here is, Paul, what do you think the percent's going to be?
Yeah. You want to know a trick, guys, on how you can see if people are reading it? Number one, don't send it via email. Number two, get one of those board softwares. There's a number out there, and you can actually track who's downloading it. Now, I'm not saying you have to call anybody out, but that's a quick way to see who's actually engaging with your materials, should you want to know that. We got a mix of questions here. Unscientifically, I'll summarize that mostly everyone is sharing before, and then there's a mixture of answers about if their board's engaging or not. So another way you can that again, this isn't foolproof, is Mike, I would say sharing discussion questions before the meeting too could also be a strategy.
Yeah, and another way, Paul, that and we don't want to burden these volunteers, but when we send out the reports, to make it a little different each time we send it out, there could be like, oh, there's a highlight on the report, go look at this, or something that said, what's your opinion about donations this last quarter? Just a little something to be like a little interactive without them having to put a lot of time into it. I've used that trick a little bit. Okay, so ways to optimize intra-year connections with the reports, what I think is really key, is we're going to break this into two areas. We're going to look at rolling projections first, and then we want to talk to you about updating KPIs, because I have an issue with KPIs, Paul, but I know it's something you and I have talked about a lot. But let's get through the rolling projections. And Paul, I think getting in the process of having rolling projections on your dashboard, and what we mean by dashboard, because rolling projections aren't scientific, it's a way to force people to look forward. And it's a culture thing. And I'm going to say something, Paul, you've heard me say this before. I think it should be illegal for a 12/31 year end to put out a March set of financial reports without a projection. Because early in the year, things could be looking great. And we know crap's going to hit the fan at a certain point in time, 3 months down the road. But the March reports look great. And it all could be because of a slowdown or something.
Yeah, I think you always need some sort of forward-looking analysis. I'm open to the form of it, but like I come back to, we can't change March's numbers unless there's an error. But based on discussions of where we're going to end up at, we can make programmatic and financial and other operational decisions, but we need those projections in order to have a healthy conversation. An organization I served with the other day, Mike, they're evaluating certain cost-cutting measures, and they discussed them, and we didn't have projections in front of us, and I said, hey, I don't feel like I have enough information to comment on this decision.
Exactly. And the cost-cutting measure will affect current results and future results, both what I like to say intermediate term and short term. Short term is the remainder of that year. Intermediate term is how's it going to impact the next year. The key to the projections, Paul, and there could be and this is a personal thing for me, is that the projections need to come through an interactive process. And it should not be coming through the finance department. We can facilitate them, but us finance people are not running most of these programs or have the intimate knowledge. And I think the connection of having this roll up so we want to make sure that the process is actually more important than what comes out of it, the numbers. That people are having this discussion and considering what's coming on. And it's all about these non-financial managers. And I know today here the focus is on the board. And the boards are non-financial managers, but so are staff. And obviously the finance managers are the finance department and such. And we need to focus from their perspective as Paul was talking. So there's a little saying here that I repeat all the time. Projections allow you to look at a transaction today in terms of year-end dollars. And back to that dilemma, 3 months in, March 31st, program starting out later, so the expenses are way under the original budget that was set up to start. But if we had that roll forward, we would see that. March number becomes important, but we can start to see we're way underspent as of March, but our projection showing us we're actually going to overspend. And right through my mind, it starts triggering things. So I really think these rolling projections, Paul, are it's the thing I lean into. I always want to know what's coming, and that's constantly changing. So 3 designs, getting non-financial managers into the system, that we encourage this rolling projection process is driven from them, and that we have a discussion based on it. Because it doesn't stop with the projection, right, Paul? It's based on this projection, we have a chance to change our future, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's we just went over this. It's so typical, but Paul, there's so many nuances to this. And we just described this situation, that a current savings looks good. I can't tell you how many times, and early in my career I would see this. It's we're always reporting for nonprofits spending is below budget in the first quarter of the year. It just seems. But we all know that that's usually because we got some sort of pause or delay or something in the process. So just keep that in mind there. And take a look at our planning tip here. And this is the one, Paul, I think I want to stop here and spend a moment on, and we're good on time. We want the non-financial managers, both at the board level and staff, to be able to, as this new information comes available, that there's a way to communicate this information, because speed here is of essence. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, within reason. I mean, we don't want to rush through everything, but at the same time, we want to make sure we have enough time to fully respond to and address an issue.
Correct. And yeah, it's a balancing act, and there's some materiality to this. We don't want to know about a little change. But Paul, I like to think of it this way. The formula is inversely related. The earlier in the year we pick up on a trend, either positive or negative, the more we can do to fix a change and do something about it or get out in front. The later in the year we pick up on a trend, either positive or negative, the opposite happens. So that's a given for me. And the other side I like to think about is the formula is exponential. As you get later in the year, the chances to fix something that year become harder and harder. To save 5% on labor is always extremely important. But if we pick up that on the first quarter, we have a chance. You pick up on that later in the year, it becomes increasingly harder to do. And I just think information early is always better than information out. And I think boards, that's a comfort zone, is when they start to see that you're on top of this and doing the projections, and you say that you have a conversation, you say, hey, look, our early projections now are showing this. This is what we're going to try to do. We're going to keep an eye on it. But it's never easy, right, Paul, to gaze into the future, and sometimes it's scary. So it's just having these active discussions around this, and the actual projections are the icing on the cake. I think it's the discussions that lead to the projections.
Yeah, and that's what these meetings should be, And if everyone takes one thing from this presentation, don't use your finance committee meetings to discuss financial results. Use it to discuss the steps moving forward. That's where the beneficial conversations happen. That's when the value add is to these meetings, because anyone can present numbers that's already happened. What you need to do is discuss the path forward.
Exactly. Two things to remind people of. Number one, what is a budget? They don't exist. A budget is a projection that you ask the board to approve as a budget. Correct? That's what a budget is. It's a projection early. How long does a budget last? For me, it lasts 3.5 seconds, because everything around you is constantly changing. So the projection is a way to sort of almost like reset that budget on an ongoing basis. That's why I don't want to overstate it, Paul, but to me, I wouldn't be sitting here if I hadn't been projections has been part of my soul. So that brings us up to the polling question number 2.
All right. Does your nonprofit organization prepare and include rolling projections as a part of your regular reporting? Yes or no? And we'd love your other feedback. If yes, do you want to give us some background about the projections? And if no, just any background why you don't, or if you want to start doing it.
I'd love to see that yes, no, but I'm interested to see how people do this. There's different ways, how often. I would like to say something, Paul, that I don't like. And can I do it right here? And the one thing I don't like is doing projections only on a quarterly basis. I think too much time goes by in that 90 days. And even 30 days scares me, but we can't do it more often than that.
Yeah. Okay. So again, unscientific results. I'd say we're probably more in the no category here. I'd guess it's probably 60-40 no, but a high amount of the individuals who say no say they think they want to do it moving forward, which that's what this presentation is here for.
I'd like to answer the obstacle one on the bottom real fast, Paul. And I think the obstacle is man-made. It's self-made. I think the projections don't have to be a lot of work. They should be very simplified. We're looking for very material changes and things and such. So don't leave the obstacles like we don't have time to do these. You do have time. Okay. So let's go into the second part of this one, Paul, which is looking at KPIs. Boy, for a long time, I felt about KPIs like people felt about strategic plans about 5-6 years ago before COVID. It's like there was a lot of people, I went to a lot of ASAE meetings, and they say strategic plans are dead, don't do them and all this. And the reason is they're hard to keep them current, right? You spend all this time coming up with them. So doing the assessments of KPIs is we need these assessment tools, but unlike a strategic plan, we can control and updating these. And I think generally KPIs get old fairly quick. We fail to check to see if they're relevant, right, Paul? That's the key word there, is relevant.
Yeah, and here's the thing. These are constantly changing, and I know it's a bear, it's a lot, it's work to continually update these, but that, the other side of the coin is that is where the value is provided. Now, that's not to say there aren't some that are going to be evergreen. For example, if you're a membership organization, you could have a 2 to 3 year initiative to increase members, and you're looking at data, and that's okay. But I think you constantly need to probe the question of, are these still appropriate?
Exactly. And just assume that they need to be checked more often than you're checking right now. And I think the way we look bad in the finance department in our reports is we have, dashboards are very valuable space. And if we're taking up space on that dashboard to report on something that people just don't even care anymore or make us look old, you know what I mean, Paul? Like an element that was in a strategic plan or something that we haven't even considered as important for like 3 years and we're still reporting on it. And so, Paul, these are very, very specific. If just do a quick AI search on this and ask specific, measurable, and appropriate come up those words just pop up in that order almost every time. And why? Because they work. An AI that isn't specific enough, it's not helping us. And if we can't measure ourselves, it's not measurable. Okay. And then, the most important one, appropriate is another way to say relevant. And so I think you just keep going out there. And one of these doesn't come before the other, right? You just got to it's sort of a limerick. You just got to keep saying to yourself, specific, measurable, appropriate.
Yup. Yeah, I agree.
And you got to do this. And I think people always give me a funny look, but I think you got to do it on a quarterly basis. I mean, monthly's too much, but adjusting these, and we'll see. And I can't remember how to polling question in or how often people are adjusting them. But I think a quick little survey question done a couple times a year, it's just a real quick. And I've done this at a finance committee. I've done it even at a board meeting, but more importantly, even at a staff meeting. It's just like in a quick email. Oh, thank you for coming to the report. Did you think our KPIs are check the box A, B, or C, or something? And people can do that in 3 seconds. And you're just looking to see, a bunch of these yeses are starting to show up in the maybe column now. And you can start to see if it's slipping. I love that word there, slipping in the middle.
Yeah, and here's the other benefit too. If you ask your committees, if you ask other senior executives what they want to see, chances are, Mike, they might be more engaged. Now, that's not to say you always have to grant that wish, but there could be a scenario where you get the best of both worlds here.
And Paul, you're 100% correct because you're also getting some insights to how they're looking at the reports. I'm always surprised, when we do these little surveys, or and you could do it without surveying them by doing it as an informal questions at the end of a meeting or something. And you know what? Paul, I always say to people, I don't mind being wrong, and tell me why. What I live in fear of is not seeing something. And a lot of times the survey question answer will come back and they'll say, we're looking for something. It's like, holy man, I didn't think about that. Or, they look at it a different way. And so I'm always in that search for what I didn't see. And so these little bits help. And, switching one KPI out, I don't know if you only have 5, 6, 10 or whatever, it starts to get people to feel comfortable. Maybe we should switch something else. You don't have to do everything all at once. So just a little bit of reformatting here is simple, easy, and it can have a huge impact. And that all staff includes everybody, governance, everybody here. It should be involved with this set. Paul, I'm a little I don't like having internal KPIs and board KPIs separate. I like having a shared set of KPIs, and less is more.
I agree with all of those statements. Less is always more with anything, right? If you throw out 20 KPIs, people are not going to engage. It's too much data to look at, too many questions to analyze. You've got to figure out your sweet spot. And when in doubt, go down. You want more engagement on less questions, right? That way you'll get more feedback, better feedback. It's a win for everybody.
Usually 90% of the answer can be boiled down to one or two things, and then there's a million other things in that other 10%. So listen to what Paul said. Less is more. I'd rather have three key KPIs that are actually meaningful to people that they can watch. And so, Paul, you asked me a good question the other day. It's like, what's some examples of migrating? And Paul and I just put in a couple here real quick, and this could go on for hours. But I put in a balance sheet, an income statement, and a mission one, just as an example. And, the first one's like, I've seen this so many times where I see a KPI on a report, and I just want to punch the person. It's like they have the quick asset ratio or cash on hand, and they're sitting on, 5 years of operating reserves because 20 years ago they were tight on cash, right? And they never took it out. And my dog can calculate, cash on number of days cash on hand. You know what I mean? It's so easy. But now, the organization is more managed. Let's talk about managing our operating reserves. If cash isn't tight right now. Now, if cash is still tight, we want to watch that. And you see
That's a
yeah,
pretty smart dog, Mike.
yeah. But you see that, Paul, and it's just plug and play. That they grabbed the dashboard from some place that had cash on hand. And it could be, we're not saying that's not important for the right organization. You'll see like an income statement shift. Like, here they went from a situation where their funding was very concentrated, and now they've been able to diversify it. So maybe maybe now it might be better for them to watch the average gift size. Is it going up or down?
Yeah, and my personal favorite of all of these is the quote unquote non-financial one, the mission. And I hope this sparks some thought and everyone realizes that even though we're in financial roles and we're presenting financial statements, some of these KPIs could be and probably should be programmatic in nature. Because I come back to what are we here for as a nonprofit organization? To
And
further our
Paul,
mission.
and Paul, remember the three: specific, measurable, and relevant or appropriate. That's on display. Paul's exactly right on the bottom. And here it is specific enough, like how many students are we counseling? But is it measurable, but is it appropriate? And we start to see like more like impact here. And so this, like, I like the second one because let's say we have 100 students in the program. Paul, it's good to have 150 in the students next year, right? But wouldn't it be cool to say like the percent of those students in the program, not how many, are actually getting like job offers, and if it's going up or something.
Yeah, and that could lead you to a number of outcomes. It could say, hey, maybe we need to change our process because not enough people are getting offers. And yeah, hopefully that sparks that line of thinking too that yeah, this can have a realm of benefits.
And Paul, I think what you were saying, and I think it's important to repeat, is that the numbers can inspire inspiration and innovation. And this, not that watching cash isn't important, that can inspire us to react, right? But I think something here reminds us like why we're here. And a program could be making money and it's not helping your mission. And this helps gauge these together, and then you pull them together. So it's really cool. So Paul, here's our polling question number 3 for everybody.
All right. Does your organization use KPIs? Yes or no? And if yes, how often do you change or update them? And do you have an assessment process to evaluate how effective they are?
Here, Paul, I wouldn't be surprised to see everybody's got some sort of KPIs, even if they're informal. So I think we probably see a lot of yeses, but I think it's interesting, the follow-up questions.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing majority yeses, variety of cadence of how long they update them, how they assess them. So that's great. Everyone's using it, but we'd encourage you to, even if it's just on an annual basis, and this is something, Mike, too, that organizations can do through strategic planning. This is a great topic to throw out there as a question for your strategic planning session to say, what KPIs are great? What should we be looking at? That sort of thing.
And I think when it comes to KPIs, an organization, even the finance department, can get selfish. If you want to help and implement or encourage a better behavior, you can do that through a KPI by focusing people on something they're not focusing on. Okay. So the one I always like to look at that opened my eyes early in my career was we were looking at the staff was bragging about how attendance at their events was going up. Okay. But yet the financial results were going down. And what we did is when we delved into it, we found out that attendance was being driven up through a lot of comp registrations. And when we started to see that actually full paying or early bird payments were going down while comp registrations were going up. Yeah. So Paul, we were filling the seats. Is everybody happy? Yes. Is the the financial results weren't reflect. So we started reporting on the KPIs at those percentages and looking at how we did our early bird registrations and pricing. And just that little bit like really pivoted and we reversed the results. Okay, this is my favorite of the day here. Is I think CFOs and finance people need to communicate beyond the numbers, and I think we're in a really unique position. That's coming from a very biased person, but I always feel like us guys, we could run organizations, and we can run finance areas and departments. But I think people trust us, but they view us as just the protectors, right, of the financial information.
Well, it's pretty strong wording, devoid of strategic thought. Trust us, Mike and I don't think you guys are devoid of strategic thought. We're going to convince you how to change the perception, though.
And we do have that, and I think it's a little bit of a self-inflicted wound again because we should be talking about programs, not just reporting, through financial reports. And I think we have this voice, but to me, Paul, I think our messaging should be mission, program, activity, oversight, then the numbers to support our position versus, oh, here's where we are financially. We're behind budget, and I think this program is not good or something. You know what I mean? I think we should be program first because then it looks like, I know this is going to really date me. It's like you walk down the hallway with your financial report. It's like you're coming down with someone's report card, you know? And it's always bigger than the numbers, right? You can't just base hiring and firing people on the numbers. So I just, we need to be that more visible, have that communications role here out there.
Yeah, and part of this too is understanding how other people communicate around you and knowing that there's
Exactly.
not one way to do it. A lot of you probably don't have that quote unquote hallway Mike's talking about, and you probably never print out your financial results, and that's perfectly fine. But then there has to be a different mode of communication that's appropriate for that.
So if possible, and we can't do this all the time, right, Paul? Sometimes we have to lead with the report. But I think if we could try to, and even some of the time, people will look at you differently, that we lead with the message before the numbers. And then the numbers support the message. So that's what I always think about in my mind. In three tactical areas is looking at it through the C-suite, the actual messaging community, and then the strategic financial planning. And the C-suite here is this, be proactive. And whether it's virtual or in person or whatever, Paul, we're having these meetings on a rolling basis, senior management. And is the finance person at the table, or if I'm filling that CFO, that director of finance role, I'm not waiting until I report on finance. There isn't a communication around that table for the whole hour that doesn't impact finance. And I think we should be out there in front.
Yeah, and you have to consider too, are you a direct report to the CEO? I know there's several arrangements where there's a COO or deputy executive director, and you want to be respectful of that. But I think most importantly, when you're communicating, it again comes back to how do these individuals communicate best, and how can you best get in front of them? For example, sending emails to some folks might be a complete waste of your time. Whereas some folks want those emails, and others are going to want that quick 5 minute call, right, Mike? But it all comes down to knowing that individual and knowing how they communicate best.
And I think we can be really, we want to support the CEO and we want the CEO looking to us and we want to almost develop that special relationship there. But we also want to do that in many ways with the other C suite, the other managers or, or grant directors and such. From a reporting mode, just think about this real quick. You're always in one of these three. And the written, Paul, is not handwriting, but it's, are we documented in a memo or something? So the report itself is there, right? And the KPIs are part of that. And as Paul said, there's so many avenues. We boards only meet so many times a year, but we have monthly, and we're going to talk about monthly reports should be going out all the time. So the report drafted for an in-person or virtual meeting is different for a report that's drafted between meetings. And then plan for verbal conversations, and that's really artistic. When do you know is the right time to reach out to a treasurer or someone to talk about? Or to have a more extended discussion at a board call or something.
Well, I can tell you how you're not going to know. You're not going to know if you don't have a relationship with that individual. And,
Exactly, exactly.
it does, I'm going to acknowledge it does take time and effort to develop relationships. And some folks are harder to develop those relationships with. But what I can also tell you is if you can establish that, it will make your job easier. That Mike and I can guarantee to you.
Yeah, and what forces us to pull our hair out of our head is as soon as you establish a relationship with one treasurer, then they're replaced by another treasurer, and they're usually going to be the opposite, right? You
Well,
got to be.
that's where Mike and I will advocate. Don't have a 1 year treasurer term limit. That does
Yeah.
nobody any good. The treasurer only gets better at their job after 1 year. There's historical knowledge that's lost. That's my little sidebar there, Mike. I know you agree with that.
No, 100% agree with that. And plug and play doesn't work because whenever that treasurer will turn over eventually, you got to figure out it's going to be a new. And new can be good. I might have to communicate totally differently with that next treasurer coming in.
Yeah, if you ever want a way to a strategy to show why it's effective, summarize the amount of time on onboarding a new treasurer and quantify that. I guarantee you that will shock whoever you show that to, and that'll further your cause.
So take a look. You can see here in advocating for innovation, everybody wants to talk about funding, okay, new programs. Figure out where some of these are and to get you into some of the tougher questions. So Paul, we're in our quick takeaways here. We just want to spend a couple minutes on these last ones and such. And so monthly distributions, financial reports, to me, there's no question. Not only is it a best practice, it's like a have to. These reports need to come out. Now, can we force people to read them? No, but there's a lot of things that come out of that this process is happening on a regular basis. You agree with that statement?
I agree.
Here's something that might change your idea about why getting these reports out monthly is important. That individuals fill an oversight role, but we govern as a body. And to save time in the meetings, finance committees don't meet every month, but reports come out monthly that we should be doing the oversight role on a monthly basis so we can govern as a group. But if you're spending half of the finance committee meeting reading the financial reports because they haven't read them, you're losing 50% of the time you could be working on the future. So that's just a little bit of different look, Paul. And I try to do that like with little bits of training to let them know that this is why you need to read these reports in between the meetings. So when we get to the meeting, you've already read the report and we can act. And so, and we could talk about changing, these things are always, trends are changing. We got feedback from different people. And the oversight is here. Is cash going down? Is cash going up? We can watch things. Okay? So that was a real quick, look at that perspective of why monthly financial reports need to go out. Paul, I can't even think of a time where, because you can never say never, where sending out financial reports monthly is not good. I mean, I can't think of one. And we're saying to the board, not just internal distribution.
Yeah, and there's a world too where you send out financial reports monthly and you hold committee meetings on a less frequent basis. That's okay. We don't have to have monthly meetings. That where you land, I think it's based on the organization, the people involved, how much you have going on. But I did just want to point that out there, that world exists.
Been working on a lot of operating reserve policies recently, and there's a lot of benefits to it. But the benefit Paul and I want to highlight that'll connect operating reserves to both the staff and to the board is that the operating reserve policy can be used to help guide your budget's bottom line, or the surplus deficit that you're budgeting towards. A lot of organizations have a lot of budgeting policies in place, but they don't have one that says we're supposed to have a bottom line of X or Y. And so we feel like we want to just highlight this for you for a few minutes here. Again, Paul, it's my favorite and not the only one indicator of financial health. If I only have one, which is unfair, but if I could only look at one factor to gauge financial health, to me is organizations either have operating reserves or they don't. And the ones that do are in a better position, safer.
I agree with you, Mike. Again, while it's easy to look at a statement of activities and it has a very quantifiable measure of result, right? You could have a good statement of activities, but negative operating reserves, and the organization's in bad shape. Whereas vice versa, you could have one bad year, but good operating reserves, and you're fine. You wish you didn't have that year, but you're fine.
Yeah. And something we're not allowed to say in public, but I'm going to say right here, is operating reserves are equivalent of working capital for for-profit entities. And, stating a fact, Paul, I've never seen a nonprofit organization didn't have aspirations and good ideas. What I have seen is 97% of them that don't have the funds to act on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, a wise person once told me being a nonprofit is just the tax status. You have to run your organization like a business.
So using the operating reserves here, quick overview of operating reserves. I like these four elements that, we have a goal, which is that matches to our mission. And then that turns into a formula, percent, usually the number of months, 6 to 12 months. And we're going to highlight number 3 here, how that affects our budgeting bottom line and then the reporting part. And the operating reserve, just go through quickly the elements. I like to say to people, our goal is to have, 3 years worth of meals in operating reserves or something. Not to say we want $2 million, type of thing. To always talk in terms of months and how that supports. Once we have that goal down and we convert it to number of months, you're in one of the 3. Paul, you use it all the time: red light, green light, yellow light, mold. And this is very generic here. And Paul and I do want to let you know.
But it works.
Yep. But the 3-month comes out of that NORI, the National Operating Reserve Initiative. That the only thing we ended up on after banging our heads against the wall is that we uniformly, most of the people in the room agreed that having less than 3 months, pausing for dramatic effect there, less than 3 months of operating reserves is when you're in a weakened position. We never said what's perfect operating reserves. So if your group that does not have operating reserves or is just starting out, get to that 3-month mode, and then you can see yellow and green. But I've never seen an operating reserve with more than 12 months, but we try to have 24 months or whatever. The goal be that. Here's the key, Paul. This is, we wanted to rush through this, but this is one of the key takeaways from today, is you use that operating reserve as you're at that, red, green, or yellow that you're building, and you do percentages that work for you, but you could see a scaled percent here, and it should be a range. And Paul, I got to tell one quick story. I had an organization, and that last few cuts are always hard. And they had about a $7 million budget, and they had about $150,000 on the bottom line. And every finance committee would have walked away and said, okay. But they had it where based on their percent, that their goal, it should have been between 200 and 250. And they had to go back and find that extra 50 in the discussion. And there were some members who said, no, we're okay at 150. And we said, look, we have the pot. The best part of it is I didn't care whether they changed the number or not. They had the discussion. And they did end up changing it. Because why? They're looking to the future. And they needed to add another 50. And this is an amazing thing right here. And then providing reports so people can see this. And Paul and I just wanted to show you this example, very simplified report. And if you look at line 3, their actual operating reserves are going up. But if you look at line 7, in reporting for their policy in number of months, because look how much their budget has gone up on line 4. And so, hey, I'm happy at $4 million, Paul. I'm ready to go home. But when you look at that bottom line, you go, we're a much bigger organization.
Yeah, and you know when you're not going to have this conversation if you don't have some sort of dashboard structured to this. So the operating reserves in months is definitely a really good one. Another way to get across this too is to show the number of payroll periods you have or something like that. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. Again, we come back to base it on the users and how they interact, but some sort of dashboard here can lead you to have conversations that you wouldn't have otherwise.
And one other thing, Paul, you could tell somebody we have 15 months of operating reserves. But without that, 3 years ago, you might have only had 8. And I would be so excited for you. You went from 8 to 15. But what if 3 years ago you were sitting at 30 months and now you're down to 15 and you've burned through half?
Yep.
But right now, if I only say, hey, Paul, I got 15 months, I'm going to generally be happy. But I could be alarmed if 3 years ago it was 30 months. You know what I mean? So it's just the conversations that are stroked by this are amazing. So Paul and I just wanted to put that out in front of you a little bit there. So it's setting this practice, and now we take something where we have a budget. I have a budget as a bottom line. Now we have a parameter around it, and we can have a discussion. And Paul, this is where policies are good for nonprofits. What's the opposite of a policy? The opposite of a policy is public opinion. And every board member, finance going to have a different, like what the bottom line should be. But now we have a policy, and we can find it. So we want to finish with this before we throw it back to Nicole and add things. Is that small teaching moments are all around us, Paul, and I think everything we've done here today. We only have a couple of minutes left. Have been examples of small teaching moments. That there's opportunities, whether people know it or not, to explain things. We need to stop. And as a board member, even as a finance person, I'm only there a few days a year. And how many times, Paul, have you ever sat in on a board meeting and you just forgot something from a meeting, but financially you're very acute to it? And so we got to constantly be reminding people a little bit and such. So these opportunities and strategies, and we just want to let you know here, look down this list real fast. We communicate finances virtually daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. There's all these different elements, and all these have little teaching moments inside them. And then the last thing we want to say here is that, who's the audience you're talking to? And the frequency. Yeah.
Just knowing too, passing along that little bit of knowledge goes a long way. It gives that person extra confidence when they interact with you. And maybe that extra confidence will bring that idea, bring that insight, spark that conversation that wouldn't happen otherwise.
So we're just about the end here. I think, Paul, it's I think actually easy to understand comes before the word awareness. If we make it comfortable, natural, people are gonna, what's the famous saying? A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? If it just like boom. And so we feel like, that's what, our message here is for you today. Here's Paul's contact information. Yep.
Yeah, and I would just add too, in addition to being easy to understand, continually evaluating is what I'm presenting still relevant, right? Not doing the same as last year method. That too is one of my takeaways.
Perfect. So Paul's contact information is here. Mine and the website that we have with corresponding articles and things. We pop new stuff up every week. And we're here. If there's any final questions, I know we have a couple minutes before the top of the hour. We're here to address them.
So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or if you'd like us to call on you, you can use the raised hand function. Mike and Paul, if you'd like to put your contact info in the chat, you can do that as well.
Perfect.
Sure,
Just a moment to see if there's any questions. Well, we've got a raised hand, David. Let's see here. Go ahead and unmute and let us know what's on your mind.
Hey there, you guys there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Quick question for you. I know when it comes to a lot of the financials, yes, what's the meaning behind all of this stuff, especially for some of the associations I work with where they're not financial people. What I find most fascinating is how to present kind of what are the leading indicators of actions. Maybe not in terms of the money, but in terms of the tasks and actions that are taking place and being able to figure out how to forecast the future revenue based on some of these actions and things like that. Is there stuff like that that you've had to deal with in the past or came across in the past as kind of leading indicators of financial success, good or bad, down the road by looking at like marketing type activities or opening rates, just anything like that? I'm trying to kind of come up with leading indicators so we're constantly talking about the future, trying to learn from the past, but more importantly, talking about the future and being proactive in our actions as we're moving down the road. Question make sense to you guys first?
Sure. Yeah, and
Okay,
we
thank
can
you.
continue offline, but write down two words. It's hot buttons and fiduciary.
Hmm.
Understand what they are over concentrating on. I always like to know like what their hot buttons are, and I keep those out there as leading indicators for them. But what are some things that they're not watching over? And like you said, we're trying. I really like that leading indicator thing, Paul. Like, what are things they should be looking at that are key indicators as the organization going in the right direction? And we need to lead the witnesses there. And so the ones for me, I think, are to get away from some of the financial ones. Like we were talking about that one down below on the students and how we're connecting on the mission. To find some to see, like, do we have mission drift going on here? Okay. We oftentimes do not have to turn off of a program to have a financial impact. But moving a point of emphasis, just a few percentage points from program A to program B can have a huge bottom line impact and align us or correct a mission drift. Paul, I don't know, that's a couple of things I've looked at.
Yeah, no, nothing to add from my end, but really appreciate the question. Um, all right, well, we want to thank everyone for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to present. And if Mike or I